You're listening to the Unsure Entrepreneur Podcast with Roger Pierce. Whether you're scribbling business ideas on a napkin or wrestling with the should I, shouldn't I question, get ready to explore the realities, the risks, and the rewards of entrepreneurship as we share the stories, scars, and successes of small business owners.
Hi there, and welcome to the Unsure Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, you're going to hear the fascinating startup and exit story of a very successful Canadian entrepreneur. Dave Sinkinson is a SaaS entrepreneur and co-founder of AppArmor, a bootstrapped public safety software company he led with his brother, Chris. Together, they grew AppArmor into a recognized leader in campus safety and emergency response tools, supporting institutions across North America. Their startup success culminated in AppArmor's multi-million-dollar acquisition by Brave Mobile Safety in early 2022, followed by both companies being acquired by Motorola Solutions later that year. Today, Dave continues to share his expertise as co-author of the book Startup Different and host of the Startup Different podcast, which I've been enjoying, where he helps entrepreneurs build successful businesses without the hype. Through practical frameworks, myth-busting advice, and straightforward approach, Startup Different gives founders a proven path to sustainable success, one that isn't focused on unicorns or 10 times returns, but on building a resilient business from the ground up. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So thrilled to have you here. And, we met a few weeks ago at the Canadian Small Business Summit. I heard you and your brother speak, and I said, I got to get those guys on the podcast.
I'm flattered.
Because what you talked about was like, oh, this is such gold for new entrepreneurs. And that's what our show is all about. It's for nascent entrepreneurs. It's for aspiring entrepreneurs. It's for very new entrepreneurs who are on the fence about becoming an entrepreneur and starting a small business. As you know, there's lots of hesitation, lots of fear and uncertainty that goes with it. And I want to poke and prod you a bit into some of your own experiences to share with other people, if you would. But that's what the show is all about. We want to help people understand what they're getting into so they can make a choice, right? Either go for it if you've got an idea or stay in the safety of a job. Nothing wrong with that too. So let's, paint the picture beyond my bio. Tell me about the journey of AppArmor and how did you come up with the idea and how did you get it going the very beginning?
Yeah. So it's kind of a crazy story. Well, maybe not so much. We'll see. But basically what it is I was working at my alma mater, so higher education institution in Canada. And because of my job there, I was part of a committee called the Campus Safety Working Group. And on the committee was a bunch of different stakeholders from different departments of the university. And naturally, they were interested in the safety sort of posture of the campus. And one of the things that we did as a committee was part of sort of like, I think they did it every couple of years, but they had done an audit of the blue light pole infrastructure on campus. And at that time, this was over a decade ago now, but at that time, they had determined that 30% of those blue light poles, so those emergency assistance area sort of poles on campus, were broken. And this was everything from, the light bulb is burnt out to like literally the box doesn't work anymore. And just for anybody who doesn't know, the way these things work is you go up to the pole, you press the button, and it starts a phone call to campus security from like the pole's like little device. And you're supposed to go to the next pole. You can only see one pole from the next one, and you're supposed to walk to the next one, keep pressing the buttons so that campus security or campus police can come and assist you. And so with these poles not working, it was kind of a scary moment. And the strategy was, okay, how are we going to deal with this? And I just being in the right place at the right time, I said, well, what if you had a mobile app where you could just like press a button and it would call campus security? Very simple. Surprisingly, the people in the room were kind of like, oh, that's actually an interesting idea. And so then immediately I had future sold something and was terrified. And then I said, okay, I'll see if I can find some sort of proof of concept or something. So it sort of was on me to go and figure out how we're going to build this thing. And fortunately, I have a brother who's 10 years older than me, who's named Chris, as you alluded to. And he is very technical. And at that time, I'd actually been dabbling in a couple of different mobile app products. So we actually had a few side hustles that we had been working on. Revenue wise, they were probably around $10,000 to like $50,000 a year, like absolute best case. So we had like a little bit of money and we just sort of like play money while we were trying to figure out if those products could work. And meanwhile, we sort of added this new one into the mix that was revolving around public safety. We decided to call it AppArmor, mostly because we could get the domain name. And we'd had a few Pepsis at a bar not far away from the campus. And we decided that was great. And we also thought about like Under Armour. And we were like, oh, maybe we can make some sort of connection. That didn't really didn't really jive in the end, I'll be honest with you. But it was one of those things where like, this is what we're going to go with. We're going to give it a shot. And yeah, we built it with that first institution and ended up working pretty quickly with a handful more. And really the start of the journey.
So much to unpack there. And it was Queen's campus, right?
That's right.
If I
Queen's
recall.
University.
Got universities on the mind because my daughter is about to go.
Oh, cool.
She's shopping universities right now. And so your product and your story is so timely because, you worry as a father, you worry about campus security.
Well, we worked with over 100 of the 150 institutions in Canada. So chances are you go to a Canadian institution, there will be a safety app product there to help her should she need it.
So let me get this straight. Your app is going to help keep my teen daughter safe.
It's going to help the people who help her. That's the way to think about it. The funny thing about us too that kind of throws people off is a lot of people you hear about like they had an app idea and they ran with it. And we did. But what was different about us is that it wasn't like one app. Like every single institution that we worked with actually got their own mobile application. And we like to say that we didn't create the mobile app, but we created the assembly line for mobile apps. We had internal processes where we could spin up a new instance of a mobile app for a new college or university in a couple hours. Then we could pitch it to them. And that was part of our sales process, really. But then, it made it very easy to deploy these things because we had so many internal automated tools. But at the end of the day, the reason why that mattered is that, especially versus our competitors, we would get 50 to 100 times more downloads because the app, if you went to UBC, it's called UBC Safe, right? Versus company name, Safe app or whatever. Like we just did a lot better because the branding and the visual cues were all tied to the university or college we were working with.
How did that decision come about? I'm curious. Is that something the customer brought up? Hey, can you customize it? Or is it something you said, aha?
So yes, Queen's University was just like, no, you're not going to call it the AppArmor app. You're going to call it Secure with a big Q in the middle. And that's going to be Queen's University safety app. So really it was our initial customer, but that was important feedback though, right? When you think about, and we talk about this all the time on our show, but that MVP, that early product, that iterative process, we talked about, or we got that feedback from our customer that this mattered. Their branding was very, very important. It needed to be front and center for them to adopt this idea. And so it was something that we took to every single client after that, knowing that once we had figured out how to scale that problem, because that is a challenge, how to scale that, it was something that our competitors were not willing to take on. And actually, I'll say furthermore, one weird thing that happened to us too is in the early days, so we were going to have we had an app store account, of course, it said AppArmor. So if you were to deploy an app in the app stores, it says safety app by AppArmor, okay, or whatever. If like Uber by Uber Technologies or whatever. So the idea is that we tried to submit a bunch of different schools under that one under our app store account, and actually Apple said, "Oh no, you have to do it under each organization's app store account." Yeah, I don't know if you've ever worked with an IT group, but it's challenging, especially in those days when it was so nascent. People didn't really they weren't comfortable giving us access to their app store account to submit an app for them. It was a real education of the market piece was like, okay, this is the way we have to do it if you want to have this thing. But the bright side of that was that, again, it actually boosted our downloads. It gave customers a lot of control over the platform in a good way. We kind of put our money where our mouth was. Hey, we're so confident we're going to put it in your app store account. You could remove us later if you want it. That kind of thing. So it was kind of an interesting thing. So on the one hand, we had a customer pushing us that had to be branded to them. And so that was what we did going forward. And that was really, really important. And the second thing was Apple actually said, oh, no, you got to put it in their account if you want to do this.
You might have perceived that at the time as a headache, but as a marketing guy, talk about making the brand sticky. I mean, you were in the client's ecosystem.
Yeah, I think we were pretty upset when it first happened. I love the good people of the Apple Corporation, but they can be challenging to work with on some of these sorts of items. I think that we were just like, oh, another crazy rule coming down from Apple. But thinking retrospectively, yeah, it was like serendipitous. It was like actually a good thing. It didn't feel like one. It didn't seem like one. It made more work for us. It made the app more costly to deploy. But longer term, you're absolutely right. The product was very sticky. Our churn rates were incredibly low, 1% or less, depending on the year in question. We just didn't turn over customers. People trusted us. We did a good job.
And to add to the layer of bureaucracy, I would imagine, are the academic institution itself. I mean, you love them, they're customers, but there had to be a whole lot of hoops you had to jump through there too, right? For compliance, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the first hoop is just that selling to universities and colleges is kind of like selling to any big organization. That enterprise sale, you have to educate someone on the other side, on the customer side. They become your champion. You arm that champion to the teeth with PowerPoint decks and marketing materials. And we actually would send them a prototype application. So we'd send it to their phone and be like, show your boss. And that worked really well, by the way. It was Chris's idea, so I can't claim full credit. But once we started doing that, that was really, really good. So that's your first hoop. Then you kind of you have your demos and you have to convince the committee, but then you have to convince certain stakeholders, big ones being, as you alluded to, especially as time went on, cybersecurity, information privacy, like the IT group needed to know that this was something that, everything was above board. And it was like, I always used to joke because the Cambridge Analytica stuff happened kind of in the middle there. And I always used to joke on calls, well, we're not Facebook. We're not going to take your data and do anything else with it. It was all just anonymized data, or any data that we did collect was just for the purposes of your mobile app and deploying it out and making sure it worked and all that good kind of stuff. But it was a lengthy sales process. I would say on average, 6-7 months. That's a pretty significant sales cycle. Any salespeople listening, or CROs or whatever, it's all about that top of your sales funnel, getting as many leads in there as you can. And then, some things will close in 2 years and some things will close in 3 months. You don't really know what it's going to be, but you do know that no matter what, you need a lot of qualified leads and you need to nurture them over quite a period of time.
Meanwhile, you're surviving on ramen noodles and day-old bread and from the supermarket, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty lean. So another thing, I suppose we bootstrapped our company. Okay, so this is another thing that's depending on I think people would perceive it as uncommon, but it actually happens more than you think. A lot of big companies, even now, like billion-dollar companies, were effectively bootstrapped. So it's not like it can't work or anything like that, but it does mean in the start, you will have some pretty lean years. You're paying yourself, which is the important thing. It's probably not rockstar salary, but you're profitable pretty quickly if you're doing this right. I always talk about it as like short-term pain for long-term gain. Yeah, I'm eating ramen noodles now, but maybe what's a bougie meal? I'm having caviar. Maybe not. That seems really aggressive, but somewhere between noodles and caviar is where we were at.
Steak dinner.
Nice steak dinner.
So you're a self-professed sales and marketing guy. I could talk to you for hours. I'm curious about two things you said earlier. You went out there and you sold it first. You got the first company, the first organization on board, Queens. Mm-hmm. And then you built it.
Yeah.
Which is ass backwards to the way a lot of entrepreneurs think you have to go about it. They think you got to raise the $250,000, then you go out and you find some customers and you tweak and you refine. It's not true, is it? You've proven there could be the best way to do it is with a customer in hand.
Yeah. I mean, what we're all looking for is validation. And I think entrepreneurs look for validation in various places. And I would argue some of those places are wrong. And just kind of as you're alluding to, and some of them are right. The wrong place to look for validation of your business model is with venture capitalists or investment firms. And I'm sure it feels very satisfying. I didn't get millions of dollars of funding. We didn't really try either, but I would imagine it feels like pretty good. You might be like, yeah, I obviously am onto something. I just got $2 million in funding for my business. Sort of counterintuitively. And I will actually say too, some businesses do need capital. I like to make this point because I don't want to be just Mr. Hates Venture Capital or something, but some businesses need capital if you have a physical product, as an example. But most of the time, especially as a software company, you really don't need that. Instead, the thing you're looking for is validation in the market. You want to find a customer who is experiencing that pain, that is willing to commit some amount of money, anything really. Your first customer is not going to pay you the same amount as your 100th customer. Like, you're going to get a very small amount of money from the first one because you're unproven, you don't have any market credibility, you're probably building the product with them, so they expect sort of considerations. But in exchange, they will help you build your tool to meet market needs. They will probably refer you to some of their friends if you do a really good job. It puts you in a much better position to be successful and heading towards a path of profitability. I was speaking to somebody else earlier today about this, and the idea is important. You need to have an idea. You need to understand that pain, understand that problem, and then understand how you can build to improve that. Seth Godin has this thing in, I'm not going to remember the book right now because Seth Godin has 15 books. It might be free prize inside. It's been a while, but he has something called the Fulcrum Innovation. Is it doable? Is it worth doing? And why you? Is it doable by you? And those are 3 really important questions to think about as you attack a new market. And the last one's pretty important. Like for why you, it can't just be like because I'll work hard or because whatever. Usually it's some sort of fundamental experience that you've had, like you've experienced the pain, or in my case, like I was on the committee and I was talking to the people who were experiencing the pain or having the problem very urgently. It was very front of mind. And they were very keen to work with someone that would help them solve that problem basically as quickly as possible. So long story short, there is basically just you need to go to the market first to validate your idea and then try to build something. And ideally, you've got a little bit of revenue behind it. All these things are indicators that you have something credible and it's worth spending more time on that idea as opposed to going out and maybe having tepid interest from the market, trying to get funding, and then somehow and kudos to you, by the way, if you can convince a venture capitalist or an angel investor to give you like $500,000 or whatever amount of money when you don't have that much market traction, because I would think that would be difficult. You must have a really good idea. But to me, the key indicators I'm always looking for is somebody going to pay for this thing and how quickly are they going to do it?
Minimum viable product is the term that comes to mind. And so key what you've just said. You don't have to build it and then hope people will come. Go out and sell it first. And then prove your model that way and get feedback and iterate and iterate and iterate, right?
Yeah. Especially early on, that rapid iteration is going to build your product. You'll have an idea of what you think you should build, but ultimately, you just need to stand up something. So you're referring to Eric Ries. I think Eric has this comment of this, it's a half product, not a half-assed product. The idea is build that half product, go to the people who would benefit from it, and then learn from them. And they'll be, as long as you condition them that like, hey, this is a half product, which obviously you're going to do because you don't want to look stupid. And you go to them, you say that, and then they'll help you get to your version 1. And then that version 1 is the thing you're going to take to the rest of the market. And of course, as time goes on, you continue to iterate. And for what it's worth, that lean startup approach, that lean process, that build, measure, learn cycle that you're referring to, that's something that for Chris and I in our company, we didn't just exclusively leave that for product innovation. We did that everywhere. We wanted to do small bets in marketing. So we would try a new marketing channel, put a little bit of money into it, see how it did, tweak it, come back, do a little bit more. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can take build, measure, learn and apply it to almost any functions of your business. The only one where maybe you can is HR. It's hard to like hire a little bit of a person. So,
just the arm, please.
Maybe fractional hiring though might be. There's somebody out here who's like screaming fractional at their phone or their computer right now. So maybe there's an exception there, but most of the time, my experience is there's no small bets in HR.
I love it. Fantastic advice. And also important for entrepreneurs, get it out there, try it out, learn, improve, get feedback. Venture capital is actually on the decline in Canada, right? In 2023, the number of deals decreased by 28%, with the dollars decreasing by 55%. So to your point, the venture capital is not out there the way it was.
Yeah, I mean, money is more expensive as part of this. I think the risk tolerance is lower, which is going to be problematic in a market of startup, venture capital funding. I would say that generally it's pretty well known that Canada has a reasonably serious problem around venture capital funding for businesses. I wrote a piece for, I think it was like Canadian Online Business Magazine. And it's just like well known that especially, and we're always compared to the United States, of course. And just even like, we love to go per capita in Canada. So per capita against the United States level of investment, we're not even close. Like there's just a much healthier, for better or for worse, venture capital ecosystem in the United States. So this can be deflating, right? Because I think a lot of founders, I'll tell you what happened to us too. Maybe this is a helpful story. Early on in the days of AppArmor, we were in a business incubator downtown Toronto. And we were kind of around 200,000 in top line revenue. Okay. So like something's happening. The land of the living dead, if you know, Crossing the Chasm with Jeffrey Moore, we were just kind of in this zone where like we weren't really believing that it was going to keep growing. We didn't really know yet. And we started toying around with we started to have crazy thoughts. So one crazy thought was, should we try to do venture capital? And we kind of looked at that and we're like, well, why would we do that if we don't think it's going to grow? Like, how is that going to really help us? And we kind of acknowledged that the only reason we're thinking about that is because society thinks that us as a startup company, we should have funding. And that's something we ought to be doing. Maybe that's what we're missing. And we sort of shot that down. The other thing we thought about doing was just stopping, just closing up. Can you imagine that? Like I'm like a little bit rattled even saying this out loud, but We talked to our business incubator mentor who would talk to all the other businesses that were there. I think there were probably about 10, 15 businesses in the incubator. And he was just like, no, don't do that. Keep going. And there's something about when you feel like it's not going fast enough because there's this societal expectation that startups grow crazy fast. And the reality is that that's just not always true. It's actually true. It's the value of consistency. Working at it for a longer period of time, you might actually get to that hockey stick growth curve, but it may take 5 or 6 years. And I think most people expect, like, well, if I don't have meaningful traction after a year, which is crazy, by the way, or like 2 years, that I should stop doing this thing. Anybody listening today who's kind of in this hole, they're like, I just can't see if it's going anywhere. I'm not feeling the growth. I'd say stick with it. Keep innovating, keep iterating, keep improving, keep finding customers. It can get there. It just takes some time. One other fun fact here too is that on average, it takes 11 years for a company to reach $1 million in revenue on average. Now in software, it's faster. I think it's like 6 or 7 years. I don't know exactly, but it's something like that. But just, it's okay. It takes a long time to achieve market credibility. Stick with it.
And that's a very good point. Entrepreneurship is a marathon, not a sprint, as I like to say. And if you're in it for paying the rent next month, ain't going to happen necessarily. Yeah. You got to be with it for a long term. And that's part of the problem. One of the reasons for this podcast and the book I'm working on is to shed some light, the good, the bad, and the ugly of entrepreneurship. And the media, unfortunately, kind of mispresents a lot of stories of entrepreneurs, rags to riches overnight.
Yeah,
start an app today, $1 billion in a year. Yeah, doesn't work that way, does it?
I was on in another interview with someone named Lori Barkman, who's she's actually called the Business Transition Sherpa. So she takes a lot of focus on people who are transitioning their business. But she had this great line. People perceive it as any company that's in their lives as the 10-year overnight sensation. Like, like and this is the thing. Like most companies, by the time they get mainstream, if your company gets mainstream, they've been working at it for a long time, at least 7 or 8 years. I don't have any specific hard data here, but it's that kind of like zone where you're going to start seeing big successes happening where the curve starts getting exponential. But for us, we just perceive it as, oh, that happened one day. Or all of a sudden you're using Uber all the time, or Uber Eats. You just ordered food, whatever. I happen to know one of the people who started Uber Eats, like pre-revenue in the United States. And he knows Travis at Uber and all that stuff. But it was funny hearing it. It happened like way earlier than I thought. It was in like 2013, 2014. And there was only one thing you could order on Uber Eats. And that was the thing they were having that day. It was so funny. It was like, wow. By the time it came to Canada, it was just amazing. You know what I mean? Like it was a much more mature service, but we take that for granted. We just don't see it.
Takes time. It takes time. And my other favorite stat is 50% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years. Mm-hmm. Right. So the longer you're in it, you're more likely going to be successful. But that's not your story. Your story ends up on a very, very happy note. And briefly, maybe you can tell us you were acquired by one company that was acquired again by a bigger company. So you guys had a very happy ending.
So we were being courted by a number of different companies. Money was cheap back then is one thing I'll mention. And then the pandemic hit. So money was super cheap. And then the company, we were acquired by a strategic competitor out of Boston called Rave Mobile Safety. They had struggled a bit through the pandemic, whereas we had made a bit of a pivot to introduce some actual healthcare functions into our platform. And we did really well. We had the best quarter in 2021. We had the best quarter in the company's history, bringing in like $1.5 million or something like that. And so we're in this incredible, huge, we were doing 400% year over year growth. So by that point, the private equity that owned Rave Mobile Safety said, let's buy those guys because our numbers are going to look a lot better. And they liked our tech too. We competed with them regularly. We would win fairly often. I'm not going to say every time, but a lot of the time. I think it was kind of this like win-win for the private equity group and the company buying us. And so that was interesting. So then I had a boss again, which I worked for a telecom a long time ago. So that was kind of surprising to go back to having a boss, and actually a number of bosses, to be totally frank with you. Very short earnout, which was fortunate, but we stayed on even after the earnout for 10 months. And then the whole thing was acquired by Motorola Solutions for about $560 million, over $500 million. So big, big numbers. We helped that due diligence process and helped that transition occur. And then about 3 or 4 months into working at Motorola, we decided that we were going to close the book on this chapter of our career. And so then we walked away from it and since then, we've had the podcast and our book.
I was going to ask you, what are you doing, spending your time on now? What's coming up? And the book and the podcast are doing really well.
The book, Startup Different, find it on Amazon or basically any of the online platforms for book sales. So check it out. And podcast, wherever you get your podcast. That's what we've been doing, mostly so we can pay it forward. And that's why I'm here today, to just help our entrepreneurial peers maybe avoid some of the biggest mistakes we made. A lot of the book is that. The book is very much not like us slapping each other's backs, being like, look how great we are. A lot of the time it's like, so here's where we really blew it. Okay. We did have some victories in there too, but it's a surprising tone. It's very honest. So we've been doing that a lot, and some mentorship through different programs in Canada and the United States around helping entrepreneurs. So that's been really fun. And then the other thing that's happened to me recently is my son was born a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
so I have my daughter, and this is the second one. And so, not sleeping a ton.
Busy guy. Well, congratulations. That's great to hear.
I appreciate that.
I'm glad I do want to talk about the book, Startup Different. It's on Amazon, and I'll provide a link in the show notes so it's easy for people to get there. But I want to talk a bit more about the book, because I know you talk about myths of entrepreneurship and things people can do differently. It also provides a framework for building a business, from idea generation to selling for millions and moving on. So can you share a couple of your favorite myths maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say first off that the book actually addresses 33 different startup myths. There is a never-ending list of startup myths. These were just the ones we actively experienced. Just putting it all in context, it was pretty wild. And these are the biggest ones that we could think of, that we thought these would be really meaningful to new aspiring or even some veteran entrepreneurs. The three big ones I like to call out, just because the book works chronologically from the start of our company and the frameworks we use there, like ideation, even I mentioned, we went to the bar to come up with the name. That's literally where the book starts, and it ends with us leaving Motorola Solutions. And everything in between involves different ways we scaled our business from a product perspective, or sales efforts, or HR stuff. It is packed with hopefully useful pieces of information for aspiring entrepreneurs. In terms of the myths that I like the most to address, there's three that I like to get at, and I'll try not to spend too much time on this because I can basically talk forever about this. But the first one, and we kind of alluded to, which is the get big fast myth, where once you get venture capital funding, there's this assumption that this is going to be good advice you're going to get, obviously, from venture capitalists. And again, I don't hate venture capital, but the complication here is that a lot of the advice that venture capitalists give is sort of generic in nature. Get big fast, get lots of salespeople, go to market quickly. Even sometimes the mentorship you get is either too generic, or in some cases, if those mentors were in your market in question, while their advice can be helpful, the data does also suggest that they're not great at advising you because they're advising you on a market that didn't have your product in it, if that makes sense. Because you're so new, whatever you're bringing to the table, there's complications there. So the long story short is that actually a lot of businesses end up failing. You mentioned 50% of startups fail. It's all about how you count failure. My number is a little bit higher. It's actually 70%. But one fun thing about venture capital funded supported businesses is about 75% of them fail after the fourth year. And that's usually when the funding dries out, the first sort of wave of funding. So it's not a silver bullet, but people think this is what I got to do. I got to go fast. I got to get bigger. I got to do this. Sometimes you actually just have to let your market grow and be educated by you. And over time, you will achieve the success you're looking for. It just needs time. And I think about us, we would have failed. Absolutely. If we had gone to get big fast, our market was not ready for it in 2012. Secondly is for any of my product folks out there, even though I'm not the CTO of my former company, I like product stuff a lot. I like getting my hands dirty. And I'll say that one of these big myths is that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, is a total misnomer for a lot of businesses. We were talking to a company that makes interesting computer chips the other day. That's their business. And they have this new legacy issue, which they knew was going to happen, where the board that they were making their chips on is now no longer supported by the company that makes the boards. And this is a huge problem. Yeah, got a whole bunch of customers out there that have this tool. And now this is what I call a legacy issue. We had something similar where the code platform we used said, we're not going to support this in 8 more months because they got sold. And they said, see you later. And that's a monumental undertaking. We had millions of lines of code and we had to rewrite them all. Actually, what you need to do as a smaller company is be aware of what's called your tech debt. Tech debt is a term for sort of a catch-all for where your technology will start to lag behind and you'll start to age. You need to address it before it becomes a crisis. If you don't, you'll end up always allocating development or product resources to fixing tech debt issues as opposed to innovating. And this is what makes small companies turn into crappy big companies, where they're only dealing with these problems over and over again. And they ultimately get disrupted by companies that are able to actually innovate in the market where they could no longer do that. That's one really big thing. And then the last one I'm going to say, and this is probably my favorite, is the alpha myth. And this is how we have this perception that an alpha ought to be this really aggressive type, banging their chest. They're fighting a war, they're in the trenches, insert your war analogy. And the reality is that in nature, actually alphas are very, very empathetic and collaborative leaders. Even like the chimpanzees, where this term was coined, the more effective leaders of the troops were the ones who actually built bridges and were collaborative and supported. That's hilarious to say because we're talking about monkeys, but emotionally supporting each other. And as opposed to those who were just big, strong monkeys who ruled by fear. And in fact, the data showed that if you ruled by fear, you're more likely to get ousted as a leader of a troop. So the data is very interesting here because there's that piece. And then secondly is that people assume that alphas get more done, like they achieve more results. But when you look at the data, it's actually a net negative effect on the business because of how toxic they are. People end up working around them, don't talk to them, try to avoid them, pay them lip service. And generally, they make people feel worse about their work. The long game on alphas is that they're actually bad for your organization. And instead, we should try to be a modern alpha, which is an empathetic leader who works hard, listens to their employees, and is more collaborative in spirit. They do way better. Companies that have empathetic leaders have better output. They tend to perform better from a sales perspective. They tend to have higher retention rates. I mean, across the board, being a good alpha in this case vastly improves your company.
So the exact opposite of Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross.
Coffee is for closers. Yeah.
Love that movie. It's so dated now. But I think you talked about the alpha male and leadership roles in your talk too that I caught at the Small Business Summit. Fascinating stuff. And this is the kind of stuff you're sharing in your podcast on an ongoing basis because you're also interviewing people and talking about marketing and tech and innovation. Tell us more about what's happening in the podcast.
Yeah, so we like to bring on entrepreneurs. We have like our studio. We like to have people come in person if they can. Those tend to be very fun, very quick, rapid fire interviews. We've had some really great people. One Canadian great is a man named Mark Organ, who's had multiple successful businesses. He sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, that kind of stuff. Like very, very successful. We've had Mehdi Basiri from Applyboard, and they're one of Canada's unicorns, a $4 billion company. We have the entrepreneurs come on. We talk to them. We try to hear about their journey, but we also try to challenge some assumptions about the startup journey and tackle some startup myths. And it's been quite a bit of fun. If anybody's interested in that sort of thing, I absolutely encourage you to tune in, listen to a couple episodes. Listen to the newer stuff, though. Man, we did not know what we were doing in the early days.
It's fascinating. Yes, the Startup Different podcast. You can find it on a streaming platform near you and make it part of your regular rotations. You're doing so many great things. I got to ask you, though, are you investing in any companies? Are you mentoring officially other people? Are you doing that?
I do some mentorship. I'm part of something called Startup Rotman. So through U of T, which is a University of Toronto, which has been good. There's some other programs that I'm doing as well. Some stuff actually giving back at Queen's University. We'll be at the Queen's Entrepreneurship Conference in January as well, keynoting that. So that'll be very fun. And in terms of investment, honestly, because I'm kind of skeptical of venture capital, I'm not a great candidate for it. But we are doing a little bit of work with a company out west that does some tank measurement. They're called HasTrack. I love it because it's like one of the most boring companies you could imagine. Like the product is like about measuring the levels of fluids in tanks, which you think, well, who cares about that?
Wow.
Big business. It's a big deal and it's very interesting. And that's been really fun because they have a big enterprise software component as well as like a hardware component, which I have almost no exposure to. So it is kind of fun to weigh in where I can and learn otherwise from the people I'm working with.
Good for you. You're giving so much back. I know you are. And we appreciate you. That's great.
Honestly, it's fun and I get a lot of satisfaction out of it. I think here's a fun myth that maybe if we have a minute is that a lot of people assume after you sell your company, right, that you're going to feel incredibly spiritually fulfilled and satisfied. And I think that's partially true.
Hit the beach.
But I would say, yeah, I would say that it kind of reminds me of, there's an analogy for athletes that they die twice. They die when they retire from their sport, and then they die when they die. There's something about retiring, or ish, however you want to put it in quotes. Because I'm not retired. I still work and still do things. But that moving away from your business baby, let's put it that way, was a very conflicting thing. On the one hand, I was absolutely delighted that we had reached this outcome. But on the other hand, I was totally devastated because, I didn't get to spend time with the people that we had worked with, the people that we had helped us build our company, all the customers that we made over the years, and those great connections. Moving away from that was really, really challenging. After I was done, I definitely had like a void where I needed to fill it with something that was going to be definitely satisfying on a day-to-day basis. And so that's really where the mentorship piece comes in. And every time I get to talk to an entrepreneur, I find myself pretty fired up, just like this conversation today.
Oh, there you go. Absolutely. Entrepreneurs are inspiring. On that note, as we wind down, Dave, maybe you can tell me, it's hard to pick one piece of advice, I'm sure, but for someone who's way back where you were years ago, starting out or even thinking about getting into a business, but on the fence, not so sure, full of doubt and fear, confidence issues, maybe no money, what would you say to someone in that situation?
Do it. Try. Just get out there. A lot of people have great ideas and they sit on it and they go, I don't know if I'm the guy to do this or gal to do this. I don't know if I want to take this on, or maybe it's too complicated. Or look, if you believe in the thing you want to do and you really want to have your own business, you need to get out there. And this kind of ties back to one of the early things I said in this conversation, where you don't want to pursue validation amongst your peers. You want to pursue validation in the market. And the only way to do that is by taking your idea and going out there and trying it. Put something together. I'd like to joke with aspiring software entrepreneurs. You need to talk to the people that have the problem, but maybe instead of actually building a full product out, just show them a PowerPoint deck where you jump around, hyperlink stuff, make it look like a piece of software. Just give them the idea of what's going on and see if that's worth it. And if there's interest there, then you should be continuing to pursue that. So my advice, get out there, do it. You've got very little to lose except for your time, but that's okay. That's kind of table stakes in this sort of arrangement.
Fantastic advice. I appreciate that very much. Very much. Thank you. That's all the time we have today, but I want to thank you very much, Dave, for sharing your entrepreneurial journey and experiences with us. But before you go, if a listener wants to get in touch, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can, first off, our website, startupdifferent.com, easy enough to find us. And then for the book, obviously Amazon or any other major online retailer. You can also find our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And lastly, if you're just looking to hang out with us on social, you can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. That's where we do the most.
I encourage you to go and check out the website. It's this beautiful sort of animated, cartoonish
That was
theme.
Chris's idea, and he killed it. So, kudos to Chris.
I wanted to ask you, how do you prepare all those podcast tiles with the custom animation, the custom look? It's a lot of work.
We have some tools. Honestly, this is kind of like one of those scale things. How do you scale a podcast? Well, we have a few tools that are free tools that we found online, or that you got to be scrappy, especially when you have very limited revenue for the podcast. Like, I would love to have, a Tim Ferriss level. If you want to advertise on us, it costs $100K an episode or something like that. But I don't think that's going to happen for a little while. So, for now, you just get scrappy, find ways to make it work. And for us, we've just got a couple of tools that we use that make it real quick.
True to form. I love it. Well, thanks again, Dave. That's a wrap for this episode of The Unsure Entrepreneur. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
That's it for this episode of the Unsure Entrepreneur podcast. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss other candid conversations with small business owners. And be sure to check us out at unsureentrepreneur.com.